Amardeep, you began as a writer and community builder before launching BAHQ. What inspired this transition from content creation to building a founder investor community?
Sure. So thanks for having me. And why I created the community, there's a series of flukes that came along that way. And as you mentioned, your audience is early stage people. And I think sometimes you think you have to have the plan all worked out. And I definitely didn't. So writing itself was a New Year's resolution that I started out writing online after working in tech consulting. And my writing did a lot better than I expected it to do. So I was able to
Okay.
quit my job for that. And from that writing background, I became the editor of an entrepreneur's publication. And I didn't seek out the opportunity, but because I was writing well, because I was talking to different people, then somebody I knew was looking for an editor and they offered me the job. And because of that random opportunity, I then started to learn much more about entrepreneurship. I started to get all these other people talking to me. So I had a really rapid learning process by being the editor of this publication to understand how do entrepreneurs work, how do startups work. And in
Okay.
that first year of quitting my job, I didn't yet have a network in the UK. So I'm in London right now. All my network seemed to be US based because that's where my writing was. So the reason why I started the community is I was frustrated that nothing like what I was working on in the US existed in the UK. And there's also loneliness, right? I wanted to have more in-person interactions, being able to talk to more people who are from backgrounds like me. So as you probably realize, it's like in the Indian diaspora and the Asian diaspora, sometimes people don't work together enough. And that's what we're trying to change. How do we get people to work together and to lift each other up and to support each other? And that was now just about 3 years ago. So it's been a long journey since then, but it came out of opportunity and then seeing how can I use my skills to help people.
Okay. And then why you choose only the Asian diaspora and not say all founder community from any country, right?
It was looking at what was the gap in the market. So at that time, there was lots of communities for founders and investors. There was communities in London for female founders, for Black founders, for LGBTQ founders. But what I was finding is that the school I went to is 95% Asian. So what I couldn't see reflected in the UK startup ecosystem was people who
Okay.
looked like me. I knew they existed, but they didn't seem to talk to each other. And another part of that too is, so my dad came to the UK when he was about 5 years old, and he had to suffer through lots of racism and lots of bias. So I was like, okay, I'm now in a position, and my dad passed away shortly before we started this. How can I give back to that community? And how can I help us lift each other up too?
So that was the core idea of getting only the Indian diaspora. Okay. So BAHQ has impacted 7,000 plus attendees and hosted 2,000 plus podcasts, right? So what's been the most rewarding part of creating a platform for Asian heritage founders?
So I'm very lucky with my dad supporting me. My dad believed in me, right? He encouraged me to quit my job. He encouraged me to go out and chase my dreams. I think for
Okay.
a lot of people, they don't have that. So one of the best things has been is that sometimes people come to our events and they say, my family don't believe in me or my friends don't believe in me. But then they come to our community and they have a group of people who also believe in them too and who believe that they can do it. And to see that transition in people was just really impactful, to see these people who they've got a great idea, they're talented, they just the friends just think, oh no, they're crazy, right? But then they meet other people who are crazy too, and then they can all work together. And another thing that's really rewarding is I work with schools. So what we've been doing is taking people from underprivileged schools and getting them work experience, teaching them the skills. And whenever you work with young people, I'm always just amazed at how talented they are. And often in the media, they're portrayed as like they're lazy or they're this or they're that. And when you actually work with people and you can see that transition, you can see that growth in them. To me, that's really satisfying.
Okay. So you work on the underprivileged side as well. Okay. So you have built teams for startups and communities. How do hiring expectations differ when building a mission-driven community compared to a tech startup?
There's a few different ways. So first one would be when you're hiring for a tech startup, often there's a greater profit incentive. So you can attract people because you can pay them a lot, or there's going to be an incentive to pay them a lot.
Right.
With what we're doing, then we're not we're never going to be $1 billion company because we're not set up in that way. So you're attracting people who maybe don't have that ambition, or they're not as money motivated. And you've also got to look at, when we're trying to do good for the community, it's really important to us that people that work for us have that integrity, because they're reflecting us, they're reflecting our values. And for any company, right at the very beginning, whoever those first hires are, they build the culture for the rest of the organization. When we've got 10,000 plus members, we've got all these different people coming to events. If they're interacting with somebody who's got Bay HQ on their top, and they're unfriendly, or they're rude, or they're not welcoming, then that's how people's entire picture of us comes about. So one of the things we are able to attract people on is because we're making a difference, because we're making that mission. But also, just to think about, I know hundreds of investors, and if somebody works with us, they get access to that network. And for whatever they want to do in the future, they now have that badge of honor that they worked with us and they helped with us too. And I say it to all of the people who have work experience, is that put it on your LinkedIn, tell people that you had work experience here. And if they ask me, oh, how was this student? I'll be like, oh, they're amazing, right? And I'll tell them, like, this is what I saw in their growth. And that's the best way to leverage it. Is like, if you're going to do something a bit more mission driven, we're mission driven, but at the same time, we have influence, we have power in some way. Because as mentioned, 2050 podcast episodes, if somebody wants to get hired by one of those people, and they've also worked for me, and we've had that in the past, the people who didn't get the job when they've interviewed with us before, several of them are now working at founders in our network. Because it could say, okay, this person was second on our list. They're really great. We just only have one job. And then that got them jobs at other places because people trust our opinion.
Right. So a related question to this, right? So community, as you mentioned, is hiring is different than tech, right? Obviously. So in terms of how difficult or easy it is to get connected people towards community, because that is a purpose driven thing that you are doing, right? So how easy or difficult it becomes for you to convince people to get attached to a community, work for it?
Yeah, so it's kind of the stage of somebody's career they're at, where sometimes people fresh out of university, where they don't yet know what they want to do. So what's a great place to learn is with us, because you get all these opportunities. When somebody's later in their career, they'd have to take a pay cut probably to work with us. And that's going to be an interesting challenge. And one of the things we're working on right now is that next year we will be hiring somebody more senior. And it's got to be somebody who has kind of got a bit sick of the corporate life. They got sick of working for things that they don't believe in for the money. And we've got to be able to pay them enough to make them happy and to cover their expenses. At the same time, we know we can't compete with Google. I can't pay you the same as Google, but you work with us, and like your life and what you've been able to achieve and who you get interacting with, it is people who are driven by that, and they exist out there. And also right now in the UK, there's a huge amount of talented people that aren't in work, and it's tapping into those people who right now they can really make a difference. And one of the things I always look at too is that I want people who are going to stick with us long term, ideally, right? I want to hire somebody who can become the CEO in 3 or 4 years' time, and then I can just relax and sit on the beach. That's the goal.
Okay, so when you bring new team members, right, or collaborators for your community, how your hiring expectation differs between sometimes who are joining very first times are freshers but ready to join you, compared to an experienced person who has already served a particular community, right, and he knows how this purpose driven things work. So how your expectation differs when you work with a fresher compared to an experienced person?
It comes down to empathy, right? You've got to understand with the freshers, like you said, is that they've got the energy, they've got the ambition, they've got the intelligence, many of them, right? But it's about, they're new to the working ecosystem. So it's on the employer, I think, to make sure that you're onboarding them properly. And if a hire doesn't work out, most of the time it's the employer's fault. You either hired the wrong person or you didn't onboard them properly. So one of the things we look at now is when we're onboarding people, okay, what's the skills that maybe they're not familiar with that we need to make sure they're comfortable with, and where are the bits we can just say, okay, you've got this bit, we're going to leave you to it. And the challenge of that is sometimes you want to be, as a manager, you don't want to be micromanaging, but at the same time, you don't want to be not supporting your team enough. So it's really having that open conversation about, okay, these are the ways we expect things. Where's the gaps for you? Where do you think you're going to need the support? And also when you see something isn't quite right, to try and get it head on, right? So rather than let it build up. And I think this is what lots of early founders do, where they're too scared to have that confrontation. Because if you just say, okay, look, we need things to be in this way because this reflects our brand, or because this is the way that we want to build relationships, and then helping the fresher understand that, because the interactions with different stakeholders we have, so sometimes work with banks, sometimes working law firms, sometimes with founders, sometimes working with their teams. And each of these is a nuance to how you send the email, how do you write it. And until you've been in that environment, we shouldn't expect them to know how to do that. That's not fair because they've never been in that environment. And that was a learning for us to make sure that we give them that support to be like, okay, in this scenario, this is the kind of way we want you to speak, in that scenario, this way. And then training them too, right? Asking them questions, being like, okay, how would you deal with this scenario? And if they miss something, not telling them off, be like, oh, have you considered this too? And helping them build that skill set up.
Got you. So you spoke on many traits, right? So if we have to pinpoint one green flag, right, that becomes a quality mark for you when, say, working with collaborators or the new team members, one green flag.
Resourcefulness is the number one thing. When somebody takes a bit of time to just look at, like, okay, I've done a quick check on this, these are the options I think. And it's always better when somebody comes to you and say, like, okay, here's 3 options I thought were good, rather than I have no idea what to do, can you tell me what to do? And somebody who's got that like initiative inside of them, like, okay, I'm going to try and figure this out. And if I'm not sure, I'm going to check with like people above me. But when they come to you with options and they're like, okay, I think this option because of this, this, and this, but am I missing something? When somebody says something like that, that's such a green flag for us to see that they've made an attempt themselves, but they're also aware that there's potential risk involved, and it's good to check with us too.
Good. So how important are soft skills in building, say, community compared to startup?
Yeah, soft skills are increasingly important now as well with the growth of AI and the growth of different elements too, is that the technical skills are always going to be important. And I come from a technical background. So I used to be able to code, I used to be able to build apps. Having somebody who knows how that works is important. And that's always going to be important too. But the soft skills side, it's all about, do you understand your customers? Because too many people might get obsessed with the solution, but with those soft skills, it's about, can you talk to people? Can you understand their needs, their wants? And when you're working at a startup, being able to really understand the customer means you can make much better decisions. And everything we do now is people orientated, right? Is when you're talking to your boss, when you're talking to your partners, when you're talking to everybody, investors, can you portray yourself in the correct light? So soft skills are incredibly important. And that storytelling aspect, for example, is such a key skill, because when somebody doesn't understand what you do or is a bit confused, and I get this a lot, right? I interact with so many founders. If they explain what they do and I don't understand, I'm not going to engage very well, right? Whereas when they can tell a story that gets me like, oh, wow, this is really cool, then I'm much more likely to engage, because a lot of people forget, it's like, if somebody doesn't understand what you do, then there's no opportunity. They can't work with you because they just don't get it.
Okay. So after interviewing founders from Twitter, Netflix, and more, what one common trait you have seen in entrepreneur who can scale successfully? One common.
Sure. So the one common trait I see in entrepreneurs who scale successfully is that ownership, right? Is that they believe they can do it.
Yeah, the ownership is something, right? If you take the ownership, you then figure out every possible thing to make your venture successful. Yeah. Yeah, you were saying, yeah.
And I think what I see in sometimes with founders is that if they don't have that ability in themselves, like, I'm going to figure it out. And it's that belief, right? And you can have moments where you're scared or you're hesitant or like, I'm out of my comfort zone. do you still keep going anyway, right? There's always moments where I'm panicking or something goes wrong. Doesn't stop me doing it. I still carry on. And I think what they say, right, is that courage, like people think founders are fearless. Founders aren't fearless. They're brave. Even when they're scared, they just keep going. And that
Yes,
ability to keep going through the fear is that ability that will take you to the heights you want to go.
yes. So I will always tell my team we have to be in pitch, right? And we'll get the loose balls to play. But for
Yeah,
that, you have to be in the crease.
absolutely, yeah. And like
Yeah,
if you don't, you miss all the shots you don't take, right?
right. So, where do you see founder investor community like yours, when BQ, founder community like yours, like BHQ, heading in the next 5 years?
It's a really interesting time for communities right now because it's become a fad, right? Everybody's now building communities. So we were 3 years ago, but now we're seeing so many more communities coming up. And I think the really important thing is going to be about the in-person interaction in particular is going to come more and more into play. And also the depth of relationship is that a lot of communities, they might be quite surface level. How do you really build that trust? And what's going to happen, I look at it as, say, Netflix, right? When Netflix first came out, Netflix was the only streaming service. Now there's HBO, there's all of this, just Star, there's everything everywhere.
Yeah,
And people don't want to have 100 subscriptions, right? And the same thing is going to happen with community, is that right now there's many different communities. But what's going to happen, I think, is that people are going to want to be part of 2 or 3 really good communities rather than 100 smaller communities or hundreds of communities where they don't
yeah,
like it too much, right? So
right.
how do you build the depth of relationship, and and that all comes down to understanding your community needs and being the person for them, and also enabling them to interact with each other. So those communities which are consistent, which keep turning up, which adapt and pivot, are going to be the ones that last. And what I think we'll see is that everybody will have 2 or 3 communities they're part of, rather than 100 communities at the moment, because
Good.
you'll see the winners start to emerge because people don't want to be, it's too hard to keep up with too many communities.
Right. So since you run an investor founder community, right, what one piece of advice you would like to give to founders, early founders especially, and one piece of advice for investors?
Sure. So for founders, I'd say the biggest thing is just that resourcefulness, right? Is like, you've got this. Like, there's so much information online right now. There's so many places you can go to learn things. And what I'd say is when you're networking or building community or like working with communities, you shouldn't be using it at an event to try and learn. What you want to be doing is then building trust. So if you're going to an event and being like, oh, I don't understand, can you explain this to me? The person at that event isn't there to teach you, unless it's a workshop, right? They're there to meet new people to have fun. So if you can do the work yourself at home in terms of learning, and you can use podcasts, you can use all these different resources like what you have, right? But when you're in person, can you just build human connection? And if you're going to network with that, if you're going to network with investors, it's about building that connection, rather than if you're asking them for help and like, oh, I don't understand how to do this, and also asking them for money, they're going to be like, well, you don't know, like you just told me that you don't know how things work, right? And then the investor side, one of the difficult things that many founders don't see is that investors see so many founders. So if you see 1,000 founders, it's so hard to maintain your enthusiasm. And I think one of the big things for investors to do is to try and keep that childlike enthusiasm somehow, right? And part of that is just making sure they're doing things that are fun, doing things that are enjoyable. And where they can, even though it sucks sometimes, is to give the feedback to the founders. Because what happens is that sometimes those founders get defensive and they complain and they get argumentative. But if people aren't getting the feedback, they can't learn. So when investors can give that feedback, it just helps so much.
Got you. So, thank you, Amardeep.